Dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack and flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yup, what's good, original crew, man? We're back. Hey, man, we're back with another ballin'. Today's video, the most credible zombie sighting
ever recorded.
Zombie? Wow.
Really, babe?
Cause that's what I'm in my. Stop. Hey, with that being said, make sure y'all check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go if you want to first support. All you gotta do is check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's video,
liking it with a thumbs up.
Always, every single time, man. Shout out to the comment of the day.
Shout out to you.
Damn, you don't get no shout out.
Sorry, my brain was thinking about something. I'm sorry, y'all.
What you thinking about? But with that being said, let's get it. Let's check this out. Let's see what's about. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
At a certain point in today's story, you're going to hear what sounds like the end of the story, like the final reveal. Except it's not. There's a whole nother layer to this story if you just stick around, and it is completely insane. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to take the like button on an amazing vacation to this gorgeous private island with this beautiful beach. But as soon as you pilot the boat in and drop them off, you just turn around and drive away and don't come back. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the afternoon of May 2nd, 1962, a middle-aged woman named Angelina Narcisse walked into a hospital room inside the Hôpital Albert Schweitzer, which is a medical center in central Haiti. Inside, Angelina saw one of her brothers, 40-year-old Clairvius, propped up in the hospital bed. He had an IV sticking out of one arm, and he had an oxygen mask strapped over his face. His eyes were closed, and when Angelina touched his hand and said hello, he didn't react. So Angelina had just been briefed by Clairvius's doctors about what was going on here. She knew that 2 days earlier, her brother had come to the hospital coughing up blood and also running a dangerously high fever. Doctors had managed to get his fever down, but they determined that his blood pressure was really high and he also had fluid accumulating in his lungs. But they didn't know why any of that was happening or how to control it or stop it. So now, less than 48 hours after Clairvius' symptoms began, he was barely conscious. And so for Angelina, it was obviously, very scary to see her brother so sick like this, but it was also confusing because she knew that one of her other brothers had seen Clairvius just a few hours before he had shown up at the hospital with these horrible symptoms. And Clairvius, at the time, had seemed completely fine. So really, this illness seemed to have come out of nowhere. But as Angelina looked around the hospital room, she also found herself feeling pretty annoyed because she had 4 other siblings, 2 more brothers and 2 sisters, and none of them were here. Now, Angelina knew she shouldn't be surprised. Ever since their parents had died, there had been basically nonstop drama between all the siblings, and most of the drama centered around Clairvius himself. So when their parents had passed away, Clairvius was the one who had ultimately inherited their money and land. And so these days, he was sort of living like a king. He lived in one of the nicest places in their village and was constantly flaunting his wealth. Meanwhile, Angelina and her other siblings really struggled financially. And anytime they asked Clairvius for help, he refused, which had caused a huge rift in the family. So Angelina was now the only one who'd even shown up to visit him in the hospital, despite his condition being so dire. But, nonetheless, she sat down on a plastic chair inside the room, and for a few minutes, she just watched Clairvius breathing. And for a while, his breathing seemed normal. It was rhythmic, slow, but normal. But then suddenly, Clairvius's breath seemed to almost catch in his chest. And then he began making a sort of wheezing, gurgling sound, but he's like half conscious. So it was like his body was reacting to not being able to breathe. Angelina instinctively just stood up and grabbed her brother's hand and began to squeeze it. And as she did, she saw her brother's eyelids flutter open for a second, but then his eyelids closed, and she watched as underneath his eyelids, she could see his eyes kind of darting around all over the place. And then at the same time, this sort of wheezing sound that was coming out of her brother turned into a choking noise. And so Angelina at this point let go of her brother's hand, she ran into the hallway, and she found a doctor. But unfortunately, by the time she explained what was going on and she and this doctor returned to the hospital room, they found Clairvius no longer making any noise. He was totally still. And so the doctor rushed over to him and he checked for a pulse, but he couldn't find one. And he turned to Angelina and he said, "I'm sorry, but your brother is dead." The following morning, May 3rd, Angelina arrived at the small cemetery near their village for her brother's funeral. And she was glad to see that at least this time, her 4 remaining siblings had decided to show up. But at the same time, Angelina, she was in shock. She couldn't believe what had happened. The doctors had told her that ultimately Clairvius had died from something called malignant hypertension, which is basically blood pressure that's so high it causes organ damage. And also it causes pulmonary edema, which is fluid in the lungs that can ultimately make it impossible to breathe, which very likely was what that sound was her brother was making before he died, that choking sound. But the doctors told Angelina that despite knowing sort of what actually happened to Clairvius, they didn't know why it happened. It was totally unclear how he got these symptoms in the first place. And unfortunately for Angelina and their family, it seemed pretty unlikely that they would ever figure it out. It would just be this mystery. Now, as Angelina walked up to Clairvius's gravesite, she looked down and she saw her brother lying dead inside of his open casket. She reached out and touched his hand one last time, and it was so cold that Angelina pulled it away right away, and then she began to cry. The ceremony was kind of a blur for Angelina. The whole thing just felt surreal. But eventually it wrapped up, and Angelina and her other siblings were walking up to the casket to say their final goodbyes to their brother. And then after they did, they stepped back and they watched as cemetery employees closed Clairvius's casket and lowered it into the ground. However, after Angelina and her family had all returned to their homes and were, beginning to grieve the loss of their brother, something else began to happen at that cemetery. That same night, a little after midnight, 2 men sort of conspicuously entered the small cemetery carrying shovels. As they walked, they kind of kept looking around to make sure nobody was watching them, and they went up to Clairvius's very fresh grave. And with their shovels, they dug and dug until finally they revealed his casket, and they pulled his casket out of the ground, they pried the nails off the top, they flipped it open, and there was Clairvius's body. And they pulled his body out and they laid it on the ground next to the hole in the ground. Then, as fast as they could, they closed the casket back up, now with Clairvius's body again outside of it on the ground nearby, and they reburied the casket. They put all the dirt back, all the grass back, made it look like nobody had touched it. And then after that was done, they walked over to Clairvius's body and they tied his wrists and ankles together with rope. Then they wrapped Clairvius's body in a large black cloth, and then together they hoisted his body up and placed him on their respective shoulders, and together they carried him out of the cemetery and off into the wilderness on the outskirts of the village. And then when the sun began to rise, they stopped and found a good spot to hide along with Clairvius's body in the trees. And then when the sun went back down again, the 2 men were up and on the move again with the body. These men did this for days until finally they reached a massive fenced-in plot of land in northern Haiti. When they got there, it was just starting to get light outside. And so with the light, they could see dozens and dozens of these people moving through this vast field in front of them. And all these people were moving in a sort of jerky, unnatural way. And all of them were holding machetes. But these 2 men who had lugged Clairvius's body here were not afraid. They unlocked the fence and carried Clairvius's body right up a pathway through the middle of this field, past all these people. But as they passed by these machete-wielding people, they didn't even seem to notice the men or the body. It was like this was totally normal. Eventually, the men reached the middle of this field where there was this building, and the men went inside. And the interior of this building was basically one large room with a table in the center and a bunch of shelves that lined the walls. And the shelves were all stacked with glass containers that had things in them like dried plants and some taxidermied smaller animals, and also what appeared to be some human bones. And standing in the middle of this room was these two men's boss. He was a very old man, and he had this very expectant look on his face. Without saying a word, the two men placed Clairvius's body on the table in the center of this room, and they unwrapped the black cloth around him. Their boss looked very carefully at Clairvius's face, and then he smiled, and he handed each of the men a stack of money. 18 years later, in February of 1980, Clairvius's sister, Angelina, walked through an outdoor market in her small village in central Haiti. Now, by this point, it had been almost 2 decades since Clairvius had died, and Angelina didn't really think about him that much anymore. But on this particular day, as she was shopping, an old man approached her, and he was very thin, his face was very sunken, and he had this long, deep scar on his cheek that went from the side of his mouth to his ear. And his eyes were bloodshot, and they were kind of wide, like he was sort of wild. And in this gravelly voice, he told her that his name was Clairvius, and that he was her brother. But when Angelina saw this guy and heard this, she did not think this was her brother. She thought, this man is obviously out of his mind, or he's lying, or both. But this is clearly not my brother Clairvius. He's dead. And on top of that, like in addition to all the discrepancies that she's immediately clocking, this man did not remotely look like her brother did. He looked completely different. In particular, there was this big scar on his face that she certainly didn't remember on Clairvius's face. So Angelina told this man that, no, you are not my brother and you need to leave me alone. But the man, when he heard this, he sort of freaked out, and he grabbed Angelina's shoulders and started violently shaking her, insisting that no, he really was Clairvius. Angelina screamed, and the next thing she knew, she was surrounded by a crowd of very confused but worried onlookers. And then a police officer walked over and grabbed the man and dragged him away. Later that same day, a police officer sat in an interview room at the police station across from this older man who kept insisting he was Clairvius. And the story that this man told the officer about how he could be a man who had died 18 years earlier really was absolutely insane. Because this man claimed that 18 years earlier, when he died, he remembered that moment because he heard the doctor literally pronounce him dead, and he heard his siblings start to cry. And then he remembered the cold when the hospital staff moved him to the refrigerated morgue. And then he remembered the sound of them nailing his coffin shut, and he remembered what it felt like when one of those nails punctured through and cut his cheek. That's how he got that big scar on his face. It was a nail in his coffin going through his face. Basically, he wasn't dead. He was totally mentally conscious of everything happening to him. He just physically couldn't move or react in any way, and he didn't know why. But everybody thought he was dead, and he wasn't. And then he said later that same night, as he's literally in a coffin underground, basically waiting to suffocate to death, he became aware of 2 men suddenly unearthing him and removing him from his coffin, and then they tied him up, wrapped him in cloth, and then carried him into the wilderness for days. And then finally, they entered this building in the middle of this field, and they set him down on this table. And then he heard this third man thank the man that had carried him, and then this third man poured something into Clairvius's mouth, and then this guy just started chanting over and over again. And then a few minutes later, he found his body sort of was beginning to work again. He could open his eyes, he could sort of move his limbs, but things just felt different. Like suddenly his vision was very strange and hazy, and his body movements were jerky and uncoordinated. It almost felt like his mind was moving slower than it really was supposed to, like it was just dumbed down or something. And it was at that point that Clairvius said he realized what was actually going on here. Clairvius said this old man that had poured whatever in his mouth and was now chanting, he was a Bokor, which is a voodoo priest in Haiti. And Clairvius said the Bokor had used a potion to turn Clairvius into a zombie. Clairvius told the police officer that he'd been absolutely terrified and he wanted to fight back, but his body felt like jello and he could barely form a coherent thought, so there was no way he could actually do anything. He said the Bokor, shortly after this, untied him, made him stand up, and then marched him outside of this building. And he said everything looked so blurry outside, but he could tell, despite his vision, that he was in the middle of a huge sugarcane field. And he saw at least a dozen other people moving in the same sort of awkward, jerky way that he knew he was, harvesting the sugarcane with machetes. The Bokor at this point handed Clairvius a machete and told him to get out there and join them and get to work. Now, something deep in Clairvius's mind told him to use the machete to attack the Bokor so he could escape, but he said he didn't. Instead, he just walked out into the field and did start working. And he kept working day in and day out in this bizarre zombie-like state for 2 full years. Then one day, another one of these zombies finally did attack and kill the Bokor. And suddenly all the zombies were free. But the man saying he was Clairvius did not go straight home. He couldn't, because he knew this Bokor had not randomly targeted him. He had been hired, the Bokor had been hired to turn Clairvius into a zombie. And in the mind of this man who claimed to be Clairvius, there was only one person who would have hired this Bokor to do that. And that person was still alive back home in his village.
Yeah.
And so if he returned, they would very likely just kill him. So this man told the police officer that he had gone on to spend 16 years just wandering around northern Haiti, working random odd jobs, just kind of barely surviving. But he said he did keep up with news from his village. And when he saw that the person who he believed had ultimately hired the Bokor to do this to him, when he saw that person had died, he said he felt safe enough to finally go back home. Now, after hearing the story, the police officer did not immediately think, boy, this is legitimate, this must have happened.
Yeah.
Instead, he thought this sounded completely insane. But just in case, he went to Clairvius's siblings and he asked them to give him a list of questions that only the real Clairvius could answer, like super specific information from their childhood and things like that. And when the officer came back with this list and began asking this man the questions, the man claiming to be Clairvius answered all of them correctly. This really was Clairvius. The news of Clairvius's return from the dead quickly spread all across the globe. But for the most part, when people outside of Haiti read or heard about it, they assumed the story was just folklore or some kind of hoax. But in 1982, so 20 years after Clairvius supposedly died, and 2 years after he supposedly came back to life, a Harvard University researcher named Wade Davis actually traveled to Haiti to investigate the story. And what he found was that Clairvius was definitely telling the truth. Here's what many scientists and Clairvius's family believe really happened to him on the morning of April 30th, 1962, when he first got really sick. So that morning, he did wake up feeling perfectly fine. He was completely healthy, just like his sister Angelina had thought. But according to Clairvius himself, that same afternoon, one of his brothers came over and said he just wanted to put the whole family drama, about the inheritance behind them. And then he gave Clairvius a hug. But what Clairvius did not know at the time was that during this hug, his brother intentionally rubbed a fine powder onto his skin. Now, this powder did make Clairvius incredibly sick, but it was not designed to kill him. Instead, it completely paralyzed him. Couldn't move his arms, his legs, his eyes, nothing, and it lowered his heart rate so low that doctors thought Clairvius was dead, which is exactly what Clairvius's brother and the Bokor he conspired with had planned for. They knew he would be determined to be dead, he would be buried really quickly, and then right after he was buried, the Bokor sent those 2 men to dig Clairvius up while he was still paralyzed. They carried him off to that sugarcane plantation where he became a slave. Basically, he was given drugs every day and forced to work nonstop. And for the brother, Clairvius's brother, the reason he did this is to punish Clairvius for being so selfish with the money he inherited from their parents. This was the plan, to turn him into that zombie slave. It would turn out the active ingredient in the paralyzing powder that the brother rubbed on Clairvius was tetrodotoxin, which is a poison found in pufferfish. And then the active ingredient in the liquid that the Bokor gave Clairvius when he arrived and then continued to give him on a near daily basis to keep him in line was called the zombie's cucumber, which is a hallucinogenic plant that's native to Haiti. After returning to his village and telling his story to the world, Clairvius actually would go on to live a relatively normal life. He would live with his siblings until he died in 1994 at the age of 72. Even though, he was able to clearly articulate who did this to him, his brother and the Beaucourt, both of them were dead by the time he returned and told his story, so nobody was ever held to account for any of this.
That's crazy.
That is crazy.
I ain't gonna hold you. At one point, I was like, sibling. At least one of them. I know at least one of them had did it. I didn't necessarily know if all of them was in on it, but it was basically fueled over. Could you even call it jealousy to some degree, or just?
Yeah.
I'm finna say cause I don't know any other term to really put it.
Yeah, jealousy, envy, a number of things.
Yeah, cause it's it's just you, and then it's also I guess they're looking at it as you gain this wealth, we don't have any. Man, hey, it gets ugly, bro. It gets ugly when a parent passes.
Yeah.
But
it was left to him.
Yeah, but they all felt as though they.
So I guess it was especially the brother that did it.
Yeah.
Especially feeling entitled to have whatever it is that.
That's our parents' thing.
You know what I'm saying? And the fact that y'all asked for things and he was like, no, or whatever the case may be, I don't know. And that does get messy. When you just one child and then expecting for everything to just fall in line and everybody be on one accord.
It
never happens like that.
It never, bro. What you
9 times out of 10, it doesn't happen like that.
Never ever happens like that. My family going through it right now, and I wish really it would just sell it off at this point. And it's sad to say because it holds so many memories. Mm-hmm. It's been in the family for so long and stuff like that. But you just all of it is going on. People feel as though they're entitled to something that they haven't contributed to at all, and it's just just sell it, bro.
Yeah.
And then death can be so ugly when it doesn't supposed to be.
No, it doesn't supposed to be.
Because sometimes death brings people closer, but lately, because of greed and everything, it drives people even further apart.
Especially when you don't have things actually in order.
Even when family do have it in order, sometimes like this one, hey, because who knows? Clairvius probably is the one who mainly was helping take care of it. Helping take care of everything, right? That's the reason why everything was left to them, to him, and they oh no, we all should have a hand in it. He's not the only child, and then now you damn near finna kill, basically sold your own brother off to slavery? That's fucking insane, bro.
That is insane.
But y'all spin us up, man. Let us know y'all thoughts. You got anything else?
No, it was just crazy, but no.
Yeah, crazy story, man. But until next time, y'all know how it go, man. I do go by the name DJ No Kid. This is
Cee Reacts To He.
We are. We out.
No time to kick it, got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar. Let me watch out for my pocket.